want to start with something that feels almost too simple, but I think it's important to say it out loud. Most relationships don't change because someone decides to change them. They change because something in the space between people starts behaving differently. Yeah, and I notice how uncomfortable that idea can be for people, because it removes the sense of control. We like to believe that if something shifts, it's because someone chose it or failed or stopped trying. Right, and that framing immediately turns distance into a problem, something to fix, something to explain. But what if distance isn't always a breakdown? What if it's an adjustment? Adjustment in what sense? In the sense that relationships are systems, and systems reorganize when conditions change. Not dramatically most of the time. Quietly, gradually, almost invisibly.
So you're saying distance doesn't arrive as a decision, it arrives as a pattern.
Exactly. It starts as something temporary. A busy week, a missed conversation, a moment where reaching out feels heavier than it used to. And at first, no one assigns meaning to it.
Because it doesn't feel serious yet.
Right. It feels like a phase, something that will pass. But over time, those small shifts begin to repeat, and repetition is what turns behavior into structure.
That's interesting, because once something repeats, it stops feeling accidental, even if no one planned it.
Yes, and this is where distance stops being something that happens in the relationship and starts becoming something the relationship is organized around.
So distance becomes structural.
That's the word, structural. Not emotional, not moral, structural.
I think people struggle with that because they associate structure with intention. But structure can form without anyone intending it.
Exactly. Structure forms because it stabilizes something, and distance is often stabilizing.
Stabilizing how?
Well, closeness requires energy, attention, availability, risk. When those become harder to sustain, the system looks for a configuration that reduces strain. Distance lowers intensity. It creates predictability. It reduces friction. So even if it feels sad, it can feel calmer. Yes, and that calmness can be misleading. People mistake it for peace, or they mistake the sadness for the problem. But what's really happening is the system is finding a way to continue without destabilizing itself.
That reframes a lot, because then distance isn't a sign that something ended, it's a sign that something adapted.
Exactly. And adaptation isn't the same as fulfillment. A relationship can be stable and unfulfilling at the same time.
Which is hard to accept because we tend to assume that stability equals health.
Right. But stability just means the system isn't under immediate threat. It doesn't mean it's alive in the way people imagine intimacy to be.
This makes me think about how often people say, "We just stopped talking," as if talking was the thing that held everything together.
Yes, and that's another misunderstanding. Because once distance becomes structural, communication doesn't disappear, it gets replaced.
Replaced by what?
By patterns, by timing, by silence, by who initiates and who doesn't, by how long it takes to respond, by what goes unmentioned.
So silence starts carrying information.
Exactly. Silence becomes expressive. It says things without words, and often it says them more consistently than conversation ever did.
Which might explain why attempts to talk it out at this stage feel so heavy or awkward or forced.
Yes, because the system already knows what's happening. Words arrive late to the process.
That's unsettling, because it means awareness doesn't automatically change the structure.
No, it doesn't. And that's where effort often backfires. Can you say more about that? Sure. Effort assumes that closeness is the correct state, that distance is a mistake. So effort tries to collapse the space, to restore something that used to exist. But if the system has already stabilized around distance, that collapse feels threatening. Exactly. The system experiences it as disruption, not repair. And systems tend to resist disruption. So they restore balance.
Yes, often by reintroducing distance, which is why people say, the more I tried, the worse it got.
That line shows up everywhere.
It does, and it's not because effort is bad. It's because effort was misaligned with the structure that had already formed.
So the relationship isn't responding to intention, it's responding to configuration. Exactly. Systems don't respond to what we mean, they respond to how they're organized.
So this shifts the question then from how do we fix this to what is this doing?
Yes, that's the more precise question. What function does the distance serve?
What does it protect?
Often things that don't yet have language, power imbalances, unspoken resentment, shifts in identity, desires that don't align anymore.
So distance becomes a kind of containment.
Containment is a good word. Not resolution, not healing, containment. It holds the system together by keeping certain elements from coming into direct contact. Yes, and that's why silence can feel heavy but also strangely functional. It's doing work.
This is where people often get uncomfortable because there's no instruction coming next.
Right, and that's intentional. Relational space isn't about telling people what to do with this. It's about seeing it clearly.
Because systems don't change when they're pressured.
They change when their structure becomes visible. Sometimes that visibility alone alters how the system behaves.
Not because anyone forced it, but because awareness changes what the system is organized around.
Exactly. And that's a very different approach than problem solving.
It requires patience and restraint.
Yes, and a willingness to sit with something without immediately trying to move it.
Which is hard, especially when distance is painful.
Of course, none of this is meant to deny that pain. But pain doesn't always indicate what should be changed. Sometimes it indicates what should be understood.
So maybe the most destabilizing thing we can do is mislabel distance as failure.
Yes, because then we miss what it's actually doing.
And once we miss that, everything else becomes reactive.
Exactly. We act without seeing the structure we're acting against.
So if someone is listening to this and recognizing patterns, not feeling instructed, but recognizing,
that recognition is enough for now.
yeah, it doesn't have to turn into action.
No, sometimes understanding is the shift. Sometimes distance isn't what separates people. It's what keeps the relationship intact.